1914. A world full of promise is shattered by a gunshot in Sarajevo. Alliances collapse, sparking World War I, a devastating conflict of trenches, deadly new weapons, and millions of lives lost, forever reshaping history. How could the world fall into such chaos? Why did it take over 4 years, millions of lives, and untold suffering to end? Today, we dive deep into the story of World War I, a war that forever changed the course of history. The fragile peace before the war. To understand World War I, we must first examine the tensions brewing before 1914. Europe was a continent divided by ambition and fear. On one side was Germany, a young and rising empire eager to assert its power. On the other were older powers like Britain and France, determined to maintain their dominance. Austria-Hungary was struggling to keep its diverse empire intact, while Russia sought to expand its influence in Eastern Europe. At the heart of this tension was an intricate web of alliances. Germany and Austria-Hungary formed the Central Powers, while France, Britain, and Russia made up the Triple Entente. These alliances were meant to deter war, but they had the opposite effect. They created a situation where a conflict between two nations could drag the entire continent, and eventually the world, into chaos. The spark: assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, is assassinated in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist. This event sets off a chain reaction. Austria-Hungary blames Serbia and issues an ultimatum. Serbia's response is measured, but not enough to satisfy Austria-Hungary. What follows is a tragic domino effect. Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia, Serbia's ally, begins to mobilize. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, declares war on Russia. France, allied with Russia, is dragged in. Germany invades Belgium to attack France, prompting Britain to join the war. By August 1914, the world's major powers are at war. The war begins. Enthusiasm turns to despair. In the early days of the war, there was widespread enthusiasm. Young men, driven by patriotism, rushed to enlist, believing the war would be over by Christmas. But those hopes were quickly dashed. The war bogged down into a brutal stalemate. On the Western Front, Germany's advance through Belgium and France was halted at the Battle of the Marne. What followed was the establishment of trenches stretching hundreds of miles. Soldiers on both sides endured unimaginable hardships, living in mud, surrounded by rats, and constantly under fire. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the fighting was more fluid, but no less deadly. Life in the trenches, a new kind of hell. Trench warfare became the defining feature of World War I. Soldiers lived in narrow, muddy trenches for weeks or months at a time. Diseases like trench foot and dysentery were rampant, and the constant shelling left many with shell shock, an early term for what we now call PTSD. No man's land, the area between opposing trenches, was a nightmarish wasteland. Attempts to cross it often resulted in massive casualties. One soldier described it as a landscape of death, littered with barbed wire, craters, and the remains of fallen comrades. It was in these trenches that the war's human cost became most painfully clear. The role of technology. War redefined. World War I was the first truly industrial war. Advances in technology made the conflict more deadly than anything humanity had seen before. Machine guns mowed down soldiers by the thousands. Artillery barrages could last for days, leaving landscapes unrecognizable. Poison gas, introduced in 1915, caused horrific injuries and a new level of terror. Tanks made their debut in this war, breaking through enemy lines for the first time. Meanwhile, airplanes were used for reconnaissance and, later, bombing raids. Submarines, or U-boats, prowled the seas, disrupting supply lines and dragging neutral nations like the United States closer to the conflict. The global scale of the war. This wasn't just a European conflict, it was a world war. Colonies in Africa and Asia were drawn into the fighting, as European powers called on their colonial subjects for support. In the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, turning the region into another theater of war. Further highlighting the global reach of the conflict, turning points, and the end of the war. By 1917, the war had reached a breaking point. Russia, exhausted and facing internal revolution, withdrew from the war after the Bolsheviks seized power. On the Western Front, the United States entered the war after repeated provocations by Germany, including unrestricted submarine warfare and the infamous Zimmermann telegram, which proposed a German-Mexican alliance. With fresh American troops and resources, the Allies launched a series of offensives in 1918. The 100 Days Offensive broke through German lines, forcing the Central Powers into retreat. On November 11, 1918, Germany signed an armistice, and the war came to an end. But the peace was fragile and short-lived. World War I claimed over 16 million lives, with millions more wounded or displaced. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, and economies were left in ruins. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed harsh penalties on Germany, including heavy reparations and territorial losses. While it officially ended the war, it also planted the seeds of resentment that would lead to World War II. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Thanks for watching.